On the morning of September 15, 1963, over 100 sticks of dynamite went off underneath the basement stairs at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. The tragic act of terrorism committed for white supremacy completely set off the African American community in Birmingham and pushed them even further to fight for justice and equal rights. Such a hate crime left a very big thumbprint in American history. It moved many African Americans to receive the treatment that they deserve, but that has yet to be fulfilled. Birmingham, Alabama, 1963, one of the worst times for African Americans. The civil rights movement was strong, especially in the year 1963. Important marches, speeches, and people were just a small bit of the major events that occurred just a few months before one of the most tragic racially motivated attacks in history. In January of 1963, Governor George C. Wallace was elected into office. On the day of his election, January 14, 1963, Wallace gave a speech in which he said,
"In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever."
Beside the fact of him being one of the many individuals being racist toward the African American group, there were people who were fighting against racism with marches and peaceful protests. One important march was the March on Washington. The March on Washington was an impactful march that represented how the minorities wanted to be treated as an equal by being able to get jobs and have freedom. Attendees of the march included Roy Wilkins, Whitney Young Jr., Martin Luther King Jr., and 250,000 others. Another very important person during the time period is Angela Davis. Angela Davis lived in an area of Birmingham that was known as Dynamite Hill due to the constant Ku Klux Klan bombings of houses in the area. The 16th Street Baptist Church was founded in 1871 and built in 1873 as the first Black Baptist church in Birmingham, Alabama. It was a place for the Black community to feel safe and feel like they were equals. Praising the guiding and inspirational man in the sky gave them a feeling of happiness that someone had truly appreciated them for who they were. The area in which the church was located was filled with crime. Robberies, murders, hate crimes, and flat-out discrimination. The Ku Klux Klan, KKK, was a mobilized group founded for the purpose of intimidating African Americans during the Reconstruction of the Civil War. In the early years, they were fairly dormant until the 1960s when African Americans started to fight back. The Klan started bombing houses, buildings, churches, and more. Since the 1960s, the Klan has been slowed down due to internal conflicts. Certain factions have chosen to closet their racism for conservation, but others have remained open with their views as to try to change the minds of the young. This was to attract more members and to culminate more of a fall.
Kids in school, the black minorities, the Mexicans, I think they're taking their parents' drugs and bringing it to school and trying to make money off of it because their parents are so worried about doing drugs than providing for their own children. That's what I think.
On the morning of September 15, 1963, 3 Ku Klux Klan members planted 155 sticks of dynamite underneath the stairs of the 16th Street Baptist Church. The dynamite was planted and set to go off minutes before the teenagers led the Sunday service. 4 girls were pampering themselves in the bathroom preparing for the service when the church received a phone call. On the other line was a single male's voice which stated, 1 minute. Sarah Collins, the sister of Addie Mae Collins, was the unfortunate one to answer the phone. Less than 1 minute later, at 10:22 a.m., the dynamite sprayed mortar and bricks that were located at the front of the building. Walls caved in and the interior of the building filled with smoke. Horrified members evacuated as fast as they possibly could. Smoke filled the building along with deadly amounts of debris. Underneath all that debris lay the dead bodies of the 4 girls who were killed. Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, all the age of 14, and Denise McNair, who was only 11 years old. The girls didn't even have time to scream. They were killed on the spot. A 5th girl was also discovered. Her name was Sarah Collins. Upon discovery, Sarah Collins was found with her right eye missing and lost. She was also found with 23 pieces of glass lodged in her face. 14 other people were found injured at the church. Later that day, 2 young African American children were killed by gunshot by a young white supremacist. No one to this day still knows why those children were killed on that fateful Sunday. The Black community was outraged. They felt as if they were being attacked for no reason and came so far and now are right back at square one. But others felt as if this was a big triumph. Morris Dees, a lawyer of Alabama, was quoted saying, "The 4 little girls who had died weren't children. Children are little people, little human beings, and that means white people. They're just little niggers." Dees was a known white supremacist. The people of the Klan were ecstatic. To have committed such a vile act was amazing. It showed everyone that they were a force that was not meant to be reckoned with. The funeral ceremony for the 4 little girls was held the next day. Churchgoers, city members, and passerbyers attended the funeral service. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke at the funeral for the girls.
My friends, they did not die in vain. God still has a way of wringing good out of evil. History has proven over and over again that unmerited suffering is redemption. That in spite of the darkness of this hour, we must not despair. We must not become bitter. Nor must we harbor the desire to retaliate with violence. Life is hard. Times as hard as crucible steel has its bleak and difficult moments.
But the question is, God,
Why?
somebody want to know why.
Yes, Lord. We need you, Lord. One will hold on. He will discover that God walks with him, and that God is able to lift you from the fatigue of despair to the buoyancy of hope, transform dark and desolate valleys into sunlit paths of inner peace. No greater tribute can be paid to you as parents, and no greater epitaph can come to them as children, and where they died, and what they were doing when they died. They died between the sacred walls of the Church of God. They were discussing the eternal meaning of love.
As imagined, the people of the town, victims, and all civil rights activists were infuriated about what happened. They were demanding that the perpetrators be found. The first serious trial only occurred 14 years after the fact in 1977. Robert E. Chambliss was the first perpetrator convicted of murder, but still claimed his innocence, even though records showed that he was a former Klan member. Chambliss later died in prison in 1985. After he was sentenced to jail, the court later ruled that the case be ruled closed. The case later reopened in 1980, in 1988 by Alabama Attorney General Don Siegelman, and in 1997. In 1997, Frank Cherry was brought into the court to be tried. Thomas Blanton Jr., another suspect, was tried and found guilty of murder and terrorism in 2001. Frank Cherry was found guilty in 2002. Cherry then died in 2004. The fourth and final suspect, Herman Frank Cash, died in 1994 before police could find him and try him for a conviction. This attack left behind a legacy that is very important in African American history. The planting of the bomb changed the course of U.S. history based solely on the culmination of centuries of hate and racism. Even after the horrific and tragic death of 4 innocent children, America was really slow to react to the discrimination. More and more acts of hate towards African Americans happened every day after the bombing. African Americans then did not receive great treatment, and to this day still do not receive the treatment that is deserved. African Americans had to fight for what is right under the white man's rules of society. No drugs, violence, or any protest whatsoever. Whites saw themselves as the superior race since the dawn of times and better than any person of color. That mentality is still seen today in this day and age. To put blacks in their place, the time of slavery was put upon them and they were treated as animals. Slavery was then eventually abolished, but then came a different eye of superiority of white people, segregation. No one would want to be convicted or accused of racist ways because it's hard for one to succumb to the truth of facts. It's devastating that there are still people like this today with a racist mindset. Similar attacks are still prevalent in today's world. For example, on June 17, 2015, Dylan Roof, a white supremacist, shot up an all-black church in Charleston, North Carolina. 9 were killed and multiple injured. Roof himself even said, "I would like to make it crystal clear, I do not regret what I did. I'm not sorry. I have not shed a tear for the innocent people I killed." Roof was not accused until roughly 2 years later and was awarded the death sentence. These attacks have never stopped the African American community. They will still continue to fight for justice and what is right for them. Yes, they may get hurt, but they are a family all as one. So the attack on the 16th Street Baptist Church may have been a triumph for white supremacists. It was a tragedy for a moment for African Americans, which turned into a stepping stone for success.